Been 20 years and almost 300,000 miles. Let's take a look at this Durango. The body isn't, I mean, these things, for being 20 years old, living in the Southern California sun, I'm not complaining. The paint on this thing, I mean, my newer model GMC Yukon, the paint is already delaminating. But this one is in good shape. It still shines up if I wash it. I have replaced the headlights because the original's chalked up, and I tried all the toothpaste tricks and everything, and it lasts for a little while, but not very long. The only bummers on this thing is the front. My mom was out visiting and taking the kids on carpool and got a little confused at a intersection and wound up T-boning a minivan. So that front bumper cover really needs to be replaced, but one of these days, probably never. But that's about the exterior of this thing. I have used the roof rack quite extensively. I used to run a Yakima on there, and so that's very handy to get some additional cargo area. Once again, that was Mom. Thanks, Mom, love you. Backing into a pole. I guess when you're 5 feet tall, this thing's a little hard to see out of. But that's the exterior of the Durango. It's been it's still fairly waterproof. It's still fairly windproof, or at least not a lot of wind noise going down the highway. The styling on these when they first came out, love it or leave it, it was you know, quite different than most of the other manufacturers on the market. I will say also it's a bummer trying to keep these wheels clean. So even with some scrubbing, that brake dust kind of cakes in there. So it's not your typical Chrysler coating on there where it starts getting old and cracking and becoming ineffective, and then the brake dust really gets to the aluminum. So they're hard to keep clean. I wash this thing maybe once every 4 or 5 months. It's usually parked here under this tree, and so when the bird dirt gets too thick to deal with, I'll run it through a car wash. But no inherent problems with the lights. There's no, you know, bulb issues or crazy electrical gremlins, really. Under the hood is a 5.7 liter Hemi V8. It was the most powerful SUV engine in 2004 that I can recollect. Certainly when I was shopping for vehicles, this was about 100 horsepower better than most of the other options around, or maybe 50 horsepower at least. This one puts out 335 horsepower, 370 foot-pounds with a really good torque curve. There's no MDS or cylinder deactivation or any of that stuff in this. The most egregious piece of equipment on this engine is an EGR valve, which I've replaced at some point back in time. I used to run an open element, I believe it was an AFE air filter, because I found that the factory panel filter, after, you know, 10,000, 12,000 miles, it would get diminished to the point where you would see a mileage drop. But after a couple 100,000 miles, I just said forget it and put the factory air box in, and I'm just changing the panels out when I see the mile per gallon drop. The engine's been fairly reliable. I do oil changes every 7,500 miles. I use either, back in the early days, I would use conventional oil because, you know, 20 years ago, synthetics weren't as prevalent. But lately it's been full synthetic every 7,500 miles. Filters are either a Wix or a Napa Gold, which is made by Wix. Nowadays, the Fram Ultra, I believe, whatever the Fram top of the line is, sometimes I'll use that, or good old Mopar oil filters. But that's been this one's recipe for success. So I believe I've done 2 sets of coils, two sets of spark plugs, and it's 16 spark plugs on the modern Hemi. Otherwise, just normal maintenance stuff. I mean, I've done fan clutch. I used an aftermarket fan clutch when I did it, and it just always stayed engaged, so it sounded like a bomber going down the road. And so I put a Mopar fan clutch on there, and that's been great. radiator sprung a leak about after maybe 150,000 miles or so, and so I put a Amazon one in there. This one has the tow package, so it's a thicker radiator. Amazon didn't have it, and I needed to get somewhere fast, so I just threw the thinner one in there and left that in there until just recently, when I put the full size thicker towing radiator in there. And I think it's been relatively problem free until it got to about 250,000 miles, at which point it would start stalling randomly. And so I went through every sensor I could think of, you know, cam position sensor, crank position sensor. I took off the wiring harness down by the engine block and stuff, and retaped it just in case wires were shorting, and I couldn't figure it out. So my buddy Johnny Wood at Woods Off-Road took it in and scoped it and tracked it down to a bad ECU. So he replaced the ECU, and that was 20,000 miles ago, and it's been going well ever since. Otherwise, the only other thing, it's towing related, was I have burned out the around 70,000. It was still under warranty. I got the passenger side exhaust manifold gasket blew and the studs broke, and so they repaired that under warranty. And then about 100,000 miles later, I had a driver's side exhaust manifold leak and broken studs, so I did that myself. And then about another 100,000 miles after that, the passenger side went again. So, you know, the exhaust manifold studs and gaskets are really the only kind of problematic part that I've consistently, if you want to call once every 100,000 miles or so consistent, that's the only thing that's really given me any kind of issue. The transmission in this thing is a 545 RFE. I did a fluid and filter change around 80,000 miles in this, and then I'm ashamed to admit it was about another 200,000 miles until before I cracked the transmission pan again. So I was really expecting some bad stuff when I dropped that pan last summer, but the fluid was really clean. There were no chunks of metal or anything in there, so knock on wood, hopefully this thing will give me a lot more time before I have to do any kind of transmission stuff to it. But shifts fine. It's a great transmission. I really like the 545 RFE. No complaints out of me. Underneath, it's a Chrysler 9 1/4 axle, and that's a fairly good, durable, heavy-duty axle. I've not had any problems with it. This one has the 355 gears. And believe it or not, in 2004, you could get a 392 for the maximum tow capacity. I've not had any issue. I did think about getting a 392 equipped 4x4 that was sitting next to this at the dealership, but didn't really need 4x for this. And honestly, it's been, I have no problems pulling whatever I, realistically want to haul with this. And it's still, it's pretty quick. I mean, a quarter mile in under 16 seconds. The 392 ones they pull even harder, but the engine RPM on the highway with this is just pretty nice. Oh, and that's the, we'll talk about suspension while we're under here. Rather than a regular track bar, that is a Watts linkage. So you've got an upper and a lower. Basically the track bar is split with that pivot in the middle. So as the axle compresses or drops out, it stays located centrally under the vehicle. There's no, as the track bar compresses, it wants to shoot the axle one way or the other, and the Watts linkage doesn't do that. Good design. I don't know why more vehicles don't use it, other than the fact that there's a lot more pivots and it's probably more expensive to manufacture. Talking suspension, about the only mod I've made is replacing the shocks with these Bilstein, just standard Bilstein upgrades. And that was probably one of the biggest differences in the ride and handling of this thing. They're phenomenally good shocks. I really like them. So if the Bilstein shocks were a big plus, these air ride airbags, at least the way I installed them, was a big minus. I got literally 10 miles down the road towing the S120 to Arizona last year. And that thing, vehicle and trailer, right around 7,500 pounds, which is about the max for this vehicle. I put these airbags in here to level it out, but it was right before I needed to leave. I think I put them in the day I left. And so rushing, I figured that much space would be fine between the exhaust and the bag, and it just wasn't. About 10 miles down the road, going up a hill, I just heard poof, and the rear of this thing just slammed down. And so I've got to dig this bag out of here and replace it with a proper heat shield that they give you in the kit that I neglected to install. So little lesson for you kids, put the suggested components that the manufacturer gives you on when you do an install. Up front, I did the Bilsteins as well. So over time, I've replaced the upper and lower A-arms because the ball joints got loose. I replaced the sway bar end links and the sway bar bushings with just some regular parts store stuff. The brakes on these SUVs are about the same as the ones on the pickup trucks, so that's pretty darn good. I'm not sure of the specs, but it's front and rear disc brakes. I live at the top of a hill, more like a small mountain actually. So coming down, the tow haul feature on the transmission only does so much to slow this thing down. So I do go through a lot of pads and rotors. I don't know how many sets I've done over the years, but it's pretty significant. It seems to be about every 30,000 miles I have to change these out. I used to run EBC drilled and slotted rotors with usually like green stuff pads or orange stuff. Used all the different colors of EBC with good results, but after a while, with this thing not being like the primary family vehicle, I've just gone back to just regular, usually Napa Gold or Duralast Gold or Napa or whatever auto parts store pads and rotors they have. So pads, I'll just change them when they need it, and the rotors, once they get grooved, they come off. But the ABS on this thing's fairly unobtrusive. It stops really well. No complaints. So the interior of this thing was pretty good in its day. Today, it's pretty underwhelming in terms of accoutrements. So we'll get to the back there, but this is just warts and all how I have been running it. At some point in time, the sunroof developed a leak. Not a leak. There's a drain on the far side there, and it got plugged up. And so as the vehicle was sitting, being unused for a year or two, that thing started backing up, and water was just running into the interior. And so it stank. Every now and then I get in it, and you'd find that under the factory floor mats was still all wet. So I just pulled the floor mats up, and the carpet's starting to see some wear. Run a electronic brake controller for towing. The seats are in actually pretty good shape for having 300,000 miles of wear on them. The factory plastic here started breaking and disintegrating, so it's getting a little brittle, but the dash, unlike the previous generation Dodges, is good and solid, so that doesn't get sun faded or eaten away. The passenger seat's really good shape, but like I said, driver's seat's getting a little crushed here on the side bolster, but not too bad. Control-wise, all the electronics work with the exception of the resistor for the fan needs to be swapped out fairly frequently. That increased to a point where I suspected the fan motor, so I threw an aftermarket parts store fan motor in there. The only downside to that is it is a bit louder than the stock one. Also, it's a big bummer. If I can dig my keys out of my pocket while I film. I've got one key fob that still works. Sorry, guitar pick. I've got one key fob that still works. The other one is damaged and doesn't. And then I can't use these buttons or lock the door because the alarm will go off, because the receiver that gets the signal from this in terms of disabling the vehicle security system doesn't get the message. So I can start the vehicle with this, but if I were to hit that key fob, it would just continually set the alarm off until it times out. So that's kind of a bummer. I'll figure that out one of these days, but no one wants a 2004 Dodge Durango, so I just leave it unlocked everywhere I go. Backseat on these, similar story, where there's a couple little plastic pieces have broken off and the belts don't want to retract by themselves very easily, so you've got to take up the slack here. So bottom line, I've got to belt the kids in the back if they're little, because if they try to do it themselves, there's usually just a little too much slack left in that belt, and I don't feel safe doing it. There used to be pockets in the back, like a mat pocket, and at some point in time, one of the kids kicked that thing off. So with the 3 rows, there's not a whole lot of, I put the seat all the way back, so the poor kids don't have all that much leg room if I don't remember to scooch the seat up and sit uncomfortably. Juice stains all over the headliner from sippy cups being exploded, and just your normal fabric cloth wear and tear. This is the side that doing carpool and everything, the kids are always getting in and out of. So the weather strippings gotten hammered over the years by kids just going in. Again, the seat belts don't always retract, so if they've set the belt, sometimes the thing will be down here like this, and they'll leave it over there and then slam the door on it. So the door jamb is all dented and whatnot. Woohoo! Good times. But it's pretty easy for them to get in and out. Lift this up, that folds one more time, and it's a mess. Told you, warts and all. Who knows what that is? Hey, flower. And then this is the 3rd row. The SLT, unlike the Limited, only has 1-piece rear. The Limited, if I were to get that, would have a split, so you could go 50-50. Maybe it's 60-40, but you can have only 1/2 of this up, and that would have been handy so many times over the years, because when you have the rear seat, so when you've got that rear 3rd row down, you've got almost no storage in the back. So it's pretty shallow here. You can see a normal shopping bag is about all you get. So you can pile up some airport luggage, but maybe only 4 bags worth. So if the whole family's going to the airport, 6 people, it's a little tough. Little feature I thought that was super cool when I bought it, now seems a little kitschy. You've got this storage panel under here, and so in earlier days, I would put other things, but now it's just survival stuff. So spare belts, couple tools, ATF, jumper cables. I think, if memory serves, that is the original ECU, which I don't know why I'm carrying it around. At some point while trying to track down the ECU problem, I replaced the throttle body. So this is a perfectly good throttle body, because it wasn't bad. I should have probably done some more in-depth diagnostics instead of just throwing parts of this thing, but hey, sometimes you think you know better. Here's 300,000 miles of hard use and good service.